don't remember.
But he actually sounded like a lawyer last question. He actually forensically got a...
But he should. There's got so much material to play with. Why hasn't that had more blows?
Rich environment.
I know. Right, good evening, folks. If we could make a start, please. It is just 7 o'clock. I say that advisedly because I can't actually see the clock itself, so I'm going by my... Well, I don't know what it says, but it's certainly not 10 to 8, that's what it says. Anyway, good evening. Welcome to the meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. First of all, I must introduce the security announcement. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. And that takes us straight on to the agenda. And before we actually come to item 1, it's my great pleasure to welcome basically a new committee. A new committee. I'm the only fixed feature here, I think, and I don't know what that says about Worcester City Council. But Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Mackay, Councillor Petrosky, and Councillor Lamb. So welcome. It is a new meeting. And we don't have any rules except insofar as I do genuinely encourage people to say what they think and to ask questions and to challenge, because that is our job. I was just saying to Councillor Mackay, no question is too complicated or too simple. So please do feel free to engage, question and challenge, because if we're not doing that, we're not doing our job properly. So don't apologise for asking difficult questions. Councillor Lawrence always apologise for asking for difficult questions, but actually I encouraged him to do so. So welcome. And that does take us to item 1, which is the appointment of substitutes.
There are no substitutes tonight, Chairman, but we do have apologies from Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Margaret. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does any member have any interest to declare? No. Item 3, public participation.
There is none, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 4, minutes. These are the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of March to be approved and signed. If we go through them page by page for accuracy and any matters arising therefrom, page 1. Well, in that case then, we'll whiz through these, page 2, page 3, page 4, and I was there and I've seen them and they are a correct record. So after the meeting, Margaret, I will sign them as such. Thank you for your trust, colleagues. That's an accurate record, but it is. And it brings us on to the first substantive item, which is item 5, the annual governance statement for 2021-22. And Ms Stroud, Corporate Director, Planning and Governance, will introduce it, please.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, committee, to a new municipal year. The annual governance statement is, I guess, as it says, an annual statement of the Council's governance. It's a look back at the previous municipal year. It's a requirement that we do this annual review, and an annual governance statement is something that once it is endorsed by a committee such as yours, it is signed by the leader of the Council and the Director, and it is published with the Council's annual account. And it is our self-assessment of the health of our governance and the outcomes that our governance has delivered. Very much, as you'll see when I discuss the item, we very much take an outcomes-based approach to the review of our governance. And it is informative for the external auditors in the work they do and the opinion they give about the Council. So it's there as a public-facing document to give assurance to our communities and our taxpayers and so forth. And it's also part of the assurance framework that we use with our external auditors. So the annual governance statement, the way that the Council has approached it, is to organise our thoughts around the SIPFA principles of good governance. And I'm sure the committee have had the opportunity to browse the annual governance statement, which is appended to the report. The SIPFA principles are designed to align with the Nolan principles, standards of good life, but focus on what makes good governance in an organisation. As you'll know, SIPFA is actually the finance and accounting body that relates to local government, but the principles have broad application. And again, the focus of the SIPFA principles is on outcomes. So those principles are listed at 1.5 of the document. Won't read them all out, but you'll see the reference to outcomes and benefits, capacity, capability, financial performance, transparency, words that I'm sure the committee will be familiar with in terms of the local government framework. So the annual governance statement sets out in the opening preamble, sections 1 and 2, how the council is organised, what the statutory roles are, what the committee functions are, and how specifically we're organised in relation to the system, our specific set of committees, reference to the frameworks within which we operate as councillors and officers, the key policies we refer to, and how our assurance processes work, referencing internal and external. And then after that, from section 3 onwards, it begins the review of the effectiveness of the council's governance. And the opening section, section 3, notes that looking back at the previous municipal year, the year was still impacted by COVID, and council service delivery was cognizant of COVID as we navigated our way through the year. So risk minimisation, business continuity was a feature of the operations this previous year, as it had been the year before when we reported back. But we noted in our review that in common with the assessment we were able to give ourselves the previous year during the first lockdown, the council was able to continue all of its service delivery during the outgoing municipal year, notwithstanding the impact of COVID. The council managed to complete all of its own planned audit and decision-making activities against published timetables. However, the council's external auditors were not able to. We'll note that, and it's been raised previously. The external audit process now falls way behind. Don't have a statement of opinion from the auditors. Again, the opening preamble in section 3 notes that it was a requirement for the council to move back to meetings in person. That was a legal necessity caused by a change in the legislation, and so that's what we did. Moving to video broadcasting for the first time and putting risk mitigation and safe working arrangements in place. So the summary in section 3 is saying that the council, this is based on a self-assessment that officers have undertaken, including those in statutory roles, the council considers that its corporate governance arrangements have been effective this year. This is with the exception of the significant delay in receiving external audit clearance, which is of concern to the council, but regrettably not within the council's ability to influence. Then the statement notes that thereafter examples of our effective corporate governance are given under each of the SIPFA principles. So I don't propose to obviously read everything from the report, but I'll just pull out a few highlights for each if you wish, Chair. So the first principle is around behaving with integrity and upholding ethical standards. So this section notes the work programme of the Standards Committee, member complaints, oversee complaints from the local government ombudsman, and it notes that there were no complaints upheld against the council. There were no significant incidents of litigation against the council, no significant health raised. The council adopted a new corporate health and safety welfare policy. So then the next principle is ensuring openness and comprehensive stakeholder engagement. So this section of the statement notes the work we've done to introduce a new equality, diversity and inclusion strategy, informed by the results of our own self-assessment, which was quite a thorough and lengthy process using the Local Government Association standards. Notes the actions we've taken since then. Start work on our equality strategy. Equally in this section, we talk about the role of the member champions, which have come more to the fore and support the work of the committee system of building those bridges across the committee's work programme and links to communities. And we refer to the annual residence survey, the response rate received, the feedback, and we provide detailed information on what the satisfaction scores were and how those are in relation to the residence survey. And it notes that more work can be done to improve response rates, and that when we do consultation and engagement, both on the annual survey and on other matters, there's more work for the council to do to make sure it's reaching out. People feel it's really worthwhile participating in our giving us their views. So we recognise that's an area where we need to do more. The statement notes that we continue to operate face-to-face customer services, and that relates to housing services and benefits services, front desk general customer inquiries, and that the benefit of having a face-to-face customer services desk and buildings has enabled us to support the work of the National Census last year, where we were asked at short notice to stand up a census support centre and provide support to those who were struggling with the online form. The statement also notes that we delivered a set of local government elections during COVID-secure environments, catching up on the year before. These were elections for the City Council, the County Council. Members will also be aware that we've started to respond to a scheduled piece of work being undertaken by the Local Government Boundary Commission for England about the electoral warding pattern of Worcester City Council, and that we continue at a more operational level to be involved in a number of networks and pieces of multi-agency work. The next principle is around defining outcomes in terms of sustainable economic, social and environmental benefits. So in this section, we note that in this outgoing year, the Council has refreshed the 5-year city plan, which was supported by all the political groups. The statement reflects what those revised themes are, and also reflects, in terms of this section being about delivering outcomes, how the Council's assessment, consistent with what we've said the previous year, is that having clear plans in place has enabled us to be successful in our bids for capital investment into the city, and to articulate what Worcester's ambition is and where further investment would be. Similarly, we've actually adopted our sustainability strategy and started detailed work through the action plan, and we give examples of what those specific outcomes are. And that we've been working on the South Worcestershire Development Plan, which is clearly a key plan for us in terms of delivery. That work continues. The next principle is around delivering interventions necessary to optimise the achievement of the intended outcome. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but we understand that to mean the strategic decision making that you make and how you translate that into operational business to make sure that that decisions are usefully informed by data, will deliver intended outcomes. And so again, we talk about which strategic documents we've used to guide us, how we've been implementing, and how we've been responding to changes in operation of the council, how we're organised at a staffing level and at a committee level. And we reflect the amount of financial support that we've been able to provide to local businesses through the COVID discretionary grant scheme, distributed government grant, to help secure the wellbeing of the city through the COVID pandemic. And the next principle is about the entity's capacity, including the capability of its leadership and individuals within it. So we refer here to communications and training. We refer to the steps we've taken in relation to digital transformation, some of which was precipitated by COVID, but some of which has been planned in any event. And we refer to the refresh that we've done of our people strategy to make sure that as a small employer delivering a number of statutory and important valued projects, we can recruit and retain people we need to deliver those important priorities. Then the next principle is managing risks and performance through robust internal control and strong financial management. So we record that we've continued to apply a high degree of rigour to our financial management. we've met all our reporting deadlines. We've delivered all our work in time for the published external audit programme, which has actually slipped. We were able to set a balanced budget again, and we did follow plot a careful course through the Council's committee system to try and achieve as much consensus as possible on the budget and present the full Council. Approved. We reflect the impact of the COVID pandemic on Council finances, and we look at the continued reduction in income that we see in relation to key sources, car fees, and we reflect continued costs, an example given in relation to homelessness services. We reflect equally, however, though, that the government provided one-off support opportunities to the Council to mitigate the impact on our income, and that at the end of the financial year resulted in a small budget surplus of £27,000. Then the final principle, you may be pleased to hear, relates to implementing good practices in transparency reporting and audit to deliver effective accountability. And this is really to record in our statement that we value the role of Audit and Governance Committee and Internal Audit in providing scrutiny. The Chair has in fact commented on that himself, opening the meeting. Our culture is to value that challenge and that scrutiny. Internal Audit has completed 16 reviews of varying scope during the year and then has followed up on those reviews to make sure that there was timely implementation. The internal audit opinion for the outgoing year, positive assurance was given. There have been specific instances where there have been investigations in relation to fraud, which is obviously another active line of inquiry and assurance for the audit team, that related to the COVID business grants that year. And then, as required in the statement, we look back at the significant governance challenges that we faced, and then we look forward at the ones that lie ahead of us. And I think we've probably covered what the significant governance issues in the preceding year were, in that we've referred to the impact of managing pandemic impacts in terms of finances and service delivery. We also reflect an ongoing challenge that we have about managing our core services, our statutory services, alongside specific projects and major schemes, that the workload of the District Council. We reflect that as a governance challenge, and also the delay we have on the external audit work programme. And then looking ahead, we are proposing these as the priority areas for governance in the year ahead. This is how this is what we've diagnosed, and we've discussed this as a group of statutory officers as well as with the corporate leadership team. So we've considered that our priority areas for governance, to make sure that our governance is robust and serves us well, is delivering on the major projects where we've had success in attracting funding, making sure that oversight of those programmes is appropriate and that we can deliver in accordance with the outcomes that we up to. We also recognise that, in common with other councils in our sector, the council's financial future continues to be challenging. That the council's current level of reserves mean that there's no immediate concerns, but that the long-term funding model for local government is not yet certain. So that is necessarily a challenge for us and something to keep our eye on. We refer again to the external audit work programme being an ongoing concern for us. We refer also to the ongoing work we're doing to respond to the Local Government Boundary Commission review. That will run its course for the rest of this calendar year at least. We talk also about the ambitious work programme that we try and manage through the committee system, and making sure that the committees all gel well together and that boundaries are clear and that work programmes are balanced. And that we all have the capacity, officers and members, to keep the work programme on track and ensure that there is sufficient scrutiny as well as capacity to make decisions, convert these into measurable outcomes. And also we recognise that a significant milestone will be achieved this year. We're able to submit a draft South Worcestershire development plan to the Planning Inspectorate for inquiry. That will mitigate one of our planning risks significantly, represent another zone for the council in developing the policies to guide our outcomes. So I think probably I've spoken for long enough there, Chair, but I've walked the committee through the principles and the narrative that sits behind them, and I'm very happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much for a very comprehensive introduction to what I've said before at the Chairman's briefing was a very readable report. So thank you very much for that. I'll ask members of the committee to join the discussion in a second, but can I just add really to something you said right at the beginning about, and your words were, how valuable it is to have a face-to-face customer service desk. And can I just add to that, because we're not just about numbers, we're about the quality of service that we provide. And I have to say, and I'd like it recorded, that for the minutes, that every single member of the Guildhall staff are unfailingly helpful, and I think they're an excellent advert for the city. And it's really a pleasure to see them, it's a pleasure to work with them. And that needs to be said, because that doesn't come out in a statistic, but it comes out in the quality of the service that we provide. So if that be minuted and passed on. And two of them are sitting there, so that applies to you too. Right, over to members of the committee. Any questions or comments on the report? Councillor Mackay.
It comes to the newbie, so this is more of a, I suppose, a point, and you can put me right if I've somewhat got it wrong, I'm sure, but within the almost final section where it talks about looking ahead, the priority areas for governance identified. One of the big issues that's highlighted in the is about our duties in relation to risk management, and certainly the risk in relation to strong public finance management. I just wonder, bearing in mind that through strong vigilance, we identified a couple of areas where fraud could be. So I just wonder, with that in mind, and the reputation of the council above all, should that vigilance be somehow be exemplified within the priority areas for governance as well, in addition to what you have there already, to say this almost like a standing point, I suppose, because it's of such concern. My opinion, for what it's worth, is that it seems to be not overriding, but certainly very, very important to the audit's purpose of being, I suppose.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay. Ms. Stroud would like to respond to that.
Thank you. I'll go first, and then I'm going to invite our auditor to comment. So yes, the section talks about what specific challenges we think are ahead of us, but it must be said that the impact of the rapid work that was done in distributing COVID grants may have a longer tail than we think, and just started that work doesn't mean we've closed it off. So I do take the point. I think it'd be helpful to hear from Andy about to what extent that COVID grant auditing work is up in the coming year. Certainly those are examples of responding to causes for concern. The risk of fraud and financial irregularity was heightened when we were being required to distribute these grants very, very rapidly with very few criteria. Whether that's still live for the current year, I don't know. I think we should bring.
Thank you, Mr. Bromwich. Yeah, that's a very good, important point about handing money out and how it's audited, especially if it's done at speed. Everything seems these days to be done at speed without the necessary requirements for auditing. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, certainly in regards to the grants that have been distributed, we've undertaken quite a comprehensive pre- and post-check using the National Fraud Initiative, the NFI. And the National Fraud Initiative is a body that's been set up in order to obtain data from various parties throughout the British Isles. And we match those data sets accordingly. We've been using their facilities in order to identify any potential risks or potential frauds that are taking place. with the information that we've submitted to them so far, we have had, with the actual amounts of grant that we've paid, we've had very few. That has been down to the due diligence of the officers who have been looking at the applications, who have been putting the processes in place for the applications, and the work that has taken place in order to from the very start, try to reduce any potential fraud. The instructions that we were given were for all intents and purposes, get the money out the door. But we did take a slightly different approach insofar as we ensured that we had as robust processes in place as we could from the beginning with the application process, so that we could try and identify fraud, but at the same time we didn't delay the payments of those grants to the businesses that were applying for them and indeed needed them and required them. So certainly from a fraud perspective, we have in place quite robust procedures, both from an application perspective, but also from a pre and post check-in perspective, using a third party, an independent third party who is using data from national databases. So we have been fairly comfortable with the way that our third parties have worked with us, the likes of Civica and so on, in order to identify any potential frauds. And where a fraud has been identified, we have taken actions in order to try and recover that money. So as we move forwards, obviously the grants are starting to stop and head back now. But should there be a need for any further grants to be issued, we would take a very similar approach. We found that it provided that assurance for perspective. It identified those potential would have been a fraud if we hadn't had those processes in place.
Thank you, Mr. Bromwich. Ms. Stroud?
I'm just reflecting as Andy's talking and thinking about, since COVID, the two other schemes that have gone live in terms of with supporting the government with the cost of living, right phrase, but the scheme that we've distributed recently. So reflecting, it may well be that we've moved beyond COVID into other scenarios, and I think taking your point, Councillor, it could be helpful to record here that one of our areas of focus for the year ahead will be ensuring that we take the learning and the best practice as we move into further and further grant schemes, because I'm reflecting that there are other ones coming along, and this may be a new modus operandi, and we do have to get good at it. Well, we've been successful, but as far as we know, there will be more. So I take that point, and I think if that's certainly, just looking at you, Shane, that's certainly something I think we could see more of, isn't it? This grant distribution approach.
Ben, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it certainly is, and it's one of the areas where the grant-making bodies are always very keen to ensure that we're taking into account the potential for fraud and risk in respect of the money that we're delivering. So, there's been a little bit of an irony about the fact that we were encouraged very early on to get the money out to people, make sure there aren't any delays, just get on with it. And now we find ourselves subject to a rigorous process of checking and say, well, did you do the right checks, etc., etc. So, and Andy's been very much involved in dealing with that. Just to say one thing in a more general sense to address your question, Steve, around the risk element. It mentions that When we do the audit plan every year, that's agreed. Andy and I discussed that, and when I worked for SIPFA, one of my roles was a better governance forum, which was around risk management, and I helped develop the SIPFA Red Book on risk. So it's always been an area of interest for me. So whenever we have that discussion around the audit plan, we are always looking at what's changed in the year which could expose us to greater risk. So if you see a number of things which have come into the plan, some I think might even be discussed this evening around, for instance, the work with the kiln when that was established. How does that relationship work? We've included stuff around grants, which the chair of the committee has been particularly interested in, and we've also been looking at some of the. There's a lot of cash element to the work with the Ukrainian refugees, for example. So we've been keen to make sure that that's handled and managed properly. We've got proper checks and balances in. So it's always actually a key part of the construction of the annual audit plan is to think about the fraud risks in particular.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor? Thank you. Councillor Petrosky, then Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sian, for a comprehensive and really well put together report. I agree with Councillor Hamers that it was a pleasure to read. I have three questions. The first one is taking us back to the minutes of the last meeting, and it has to do with the discussion. So it's about the grants. So in terms of appointing the panel that would be reviewing small and medium grants, I'm reading in the minutes how they were appointed. It was felt that there was a need to be open and transparent and accountable, which sounds just about right. Following some discussion, officers agreed to carry out a review and bring a report back to the committee. So presumably that was the report based on any sort of hidden biases, anything that would be there to see. So would like to get a clarification whether this report has been submitted. So that's my question number one.
Shall we take one at a time? Yeah.
Yes, please.
So absolutely, we took that action away from the last meeting. We haven't. But I think taking both points on board, Councillor McKay's and yours, I think that we ought to recognise that we've said one of our governance focus areas for the year ahead is our process for the administration of grants. I think we've said actually that's inherent. Yeah. We've put it in the audit plan. We've committed to doing a review on small grants, and we're reacting to other stuff that comes out. I think we should correctly add a bullet point in to say that, you know, that our process for the administration of grants is one of our priorities for the year ahead. I think that's right, but the specific review hasn't been completed yet, and it will come here.
Thank you. Councillor Petrosky, your second question.
Thank you very much. Question number 2 has to do with the Towns Fund. So it's they advise on the disposal and administration of a considerable amount of money. My question is around the process, around the appointment of the Town Fund Board. I tried to find the terms of reference for this. The link is broken. So that's perhaps one thing that might be worth fixing. But for the clarity and just for the person, way before I was elected, actually, I took an interest in something which said, so some of the appointments are completely uncontroversial. You have representatives of the county and city council. But then there is, third sector, there is faith communities are represented there, and then communities represented. I'm thinking, well, based on the demographics and what was the rationale to actually go for that person? There's nothing, just for the clarity, there's absolutely nothing personal here, and I happen to be good friends with the person who's representing communities on the panel, but I would be interested to find out about the process that went into, and the criteria that went into appointment of that body. So that's question number 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Petrosky. That, in fact, I think is a very, very good question. Obviously, as council representatives, we know to whom we are accountable. But the other people who have equal rights and responsibilities, to whom are they accountable? It's something that's always bothered me, frankly, because we're elected, so our power ultimately comes from the people. But how does it apply to others? Mr. Stroud, over to you. You're a legal person.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. So I'm going to address your question directly about how was the Towns Fund Board constituted, but then at the end I'm going to say a word about how the Council's governance process has wrapped around that to try and give you some assurances around the checks and balances. So in relation to the composition of the Towns Fund Board, the Towns Fund process, as you know, has been a central government initiative. And when the scheme was announced as a government scheme, looking ahead a number of months to the process that all councils would go through to make a bid submission, one of the first steps that we were required to take, well, there were two steps we were required to take initially. Number one was to start a wide public consultation about what do the people of Worcester, or the businesses of Worcester, think would be good investment. So to start a public discussion on that. We were also required to constitute a stakeholder board, which was required to be called the Towns Fund Investment Board. So on that, I'll just quickly mention the first point. So we had a, I think it was called My Town website, and we did our best to promote that and just to solicit responses from anybody who wanted about what proposals they'd like to make about investment into the city. And so, and I want to give you that reassurance because it was never, even in the government's mind, it was never expected that the Towns Fund Board was the only clearinghouse for, or the only, voice of the city. It was always intended that there was an open channel through to the council, who was going to ultimately make the grant application of what does anyone and everyone think would be a good. So we did open that channel of communication. Number of responses, and in fact I'm happy to, after the meeting, send you the links for the relevant committee reports where we've reported back in how many responses we got and how we went through a process. And when I say we, ultimately that's the City Council went through a process of turning a long list into a short list mapped against the government's criteria for investment, and how we then converted that short list into a list of preferred projects, which ultimately the Council's Policy and Resources Committee to support. The Towns Fund Board, therefore, were always an important but a stakeholder voice alongside that other open channel, if you see what I mean. In relation to the specific composition of the Towns Fund Board, the government gave us guidance about what representation they would expect to see on that board. So we followed their guidance, and we invited our political group leaders to also suggest any other organisations that would fit well with the guidance. And so, and we extended the invitation as openly as we could. It wasn't a closed list, but the composition that we've got is reflective of what was expected in the government guidance. And as you said, the Towns Fund Board has taken an advisory role. So I just wanted to reassure you there that in relation to the whole Towns Fund submission process, they've been an important gateway, but they have been making recommendations into policy and resources. And that wasn't a sort of a rubber stamp at the end. The Council's Policy and Resources Committee, Chair and Vice Chair, the committee themselves, group leaders were involved in the development of the process of moving from a long list to a short list, working those proposals up. So I think it's important that whilst we recognise the value of the Towns Fund Board, it's important that we don't think that that's a substitute for our normal governance processes, because it was supplementary instead of.
Thank you. Councillor Wachowski, does that answer your second question?
That is very helpful indeed, and I would love to have a look at those criteria after the meeting. Just relying on your patience, Chair, my question number 3, and this has to do with, you would expect probably from a Green Councillor to hear something about environmental sustainability. I noticed that environmental sustainability impact is part of reports to different committees, which is really good news. However, I do have a question mark in my head around the quality of those environmental impact assessments. I'll give you one example. And I talked about it quite openly in the Communities Committee meeting. We are looking into developing a housing enabling strategy. Paid a lot of money for the consultants to come in, do the job, which they did very well, except for there was absolutely no mention, and this actually goes back to how the committees work with each other, and where and how the dialogue happens. There was absolutely no mention, so we talked about the quantity of houses, how we can possibly deliver them, but there was absolutely no mention of quality of housing. Now, I'm saying this because of the net zero requirement which is enshrined in statute, in law, and also because of this council's decision to declare climate emergency. So this is just one example, significant example. We paid £40,000 for that particular piece of work that I was personally disappointed with. What was reassuring was to hear that the actual strategy will look into the technical detail and the quality of housing rather than quantity and how we're going to deliver it. So I was somewhat reassured. However, the question mark remains in my head, and I would like to sort of point it out and put it on record as well today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think the point about whether in our committee reports, whether we get our impact assessments right is a point very well made, and I think that certainly in terms of developing our work on equality and diversity, recognise that in the context of quality impact assessments. I think in relation to the housing strategy, the housing and enabling, I suppose in defence, you no doubt had a defence provided already, but in defence of the work that's undertaken there, that work was commissioned to answer a specific question, which was, we have a statutory function in relation to housing. The data shows that we've fallen behind. What could we do to recover that position? And therefore, the gate hasn't closed at that point about how. So the implementation of anything then is then subject to the further decision making, the design process, which in our council very much something that councillors are very involved in at committee, the design of the implementation. And I'd give you the example of the Sanson Walk development, where we made a decision to demolish the swimming pool and that should be a housing site. That was the first set of decisions that was taken by the Policy and Resources Committee, supported by the work of the Audit Committee in terms of how we might better contract and learn. But that was the first set of decisions. And then I'm going to say 2 further reports came to Policy and Resources Committee about, so if we're going to have housing, how and what are we going to have? And that was socialised and discussed a lot with political groups and came to Policy and Resources Committee about balancing competing requirements, well, not necessarily competing, but potentially competing requirements around meeting social housing needs, making the scheme financially viable because we had demolition, and delivering an environmentally sustainable scheme that we could be proud of. And the committee were involved in the development of the criteria that then led to the procurement. And so, although the committee didn't sit on the procurement process, because that's not how we sort of do it in local government, the councillors will set the strategy and the officers will then run the procurement. It was the committee's guiding hand that made sure that the criteria made sufficient allowance for high quality environmental scheme. So I'd want to reassure you, if you give that as a parallel example, that the housing strategy is about how we're going to meet our housing numbers. Then, okay, so actually how? On a site-by-site basis, what do we want to do? So I take the point about the impact assessment in a report, but I would just temper that by saying that as officers, when we're doing a report, sometimes we will hold back on some of the implications and think that's for a later step. So you will see reports where we put in a bid for funding where we'll say detailed project plans and business cases will need to be signed off by the committee at every stage, which is a sort of holding position from us, which is we'll come back to this. So I very much welcome the challenge, and I think in relation to impact assessments generally, I'm sure there's more we need to do and get better at it. But I'd want to reassure you that in the context of housing, that point hasn't been kind of done and put to bed.
Thank you, Councillor Trotsky. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. I might have misunderstood it, but I'm an internal auditor at a UCAS laboratory, and like most assessments and stuff, it is a risk-based. We hadn't had an external auditor come in for 3 years, but they are coming in now. Are we going to go to our auditors and ask them when they are intending to fix a date with us? Because I think we forward to us, because it is a risk and they shouldn't be allowing us to carry that assessment organisation. They should be ahead of the game, as you were with us. The only reason we haven't seen the science side is because he unfortunately got COVID just in time and they didn't want to reschedule it again. So he's done 3 hybrid meetings in a row, but it's a bit easier for him. Not very easy for our work, as it involves physical testing. And it's been quite a relief, to be fair, to have them back in and meet the team again, rather than dealing with somebody through a screen and sending them work and documents to read. And I'm wandering around with the phone, WhatsApping it. So that was my question, really. Are we taking the question back to them?
Question. I thought, in fact, Councillor Barnes was going to ask it because she was very vocal at the chairman's briefing about the external audit. but perhaps is it Jenny on that particular point? Well, if we could merge the 2 questions, because I think it would be helpful if the committee can be updated on external audit, because I think it is a matter of concern. I think we should all know where we are, exactly where we are.
And I'd like and whether we've actually paid anything, because obviously we're not getting anything back at the moment, and it's an enormous liability, enormous risk that there could be something coming out of the external audit that we need to be aware of. So the longer it's held back, the more risk it is to us. Now, I know that we've had some excellent internal audits and they probably catch more than external would. But even so, it's deeply concerning that we're nearly a year overdue on the previous one. We don't know that, I don't think they've even started the work for 21-22. Are they going to be merged, or how is it going to work? Because it's completely, we're meant to be in a legal framework where things have to be done. We've been messed around for months. They tried to charge us extra, which I hope we're refusing, but should we be paying at all? It's all done through the local government association, but it means that we don't seem to have any way of putting pressure on them financially, because it's all done at a bit of an arm's length, and I wonder whether we could look into that. Certainly not pay anything more than we've already paid until we get at least 21 out and a good start on 22.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Mr. Finn, if you can take Councillor Lawrence's question in conjunction with Councillor Barnes' question. Give us an update, please. Robust answer to the points made.
Robust. Thank
robust,
you.
definitely.
Well, I'll treat them as closed questions in that case. Have we paid for 2019-20? The answer is no, not yet. We had a dispute over the amount of payment that was due, because they argued that there was more work than was necessary, and we argued, well, that's not our issue. You've set the fee and that's what you should be charging for. That went to the PSAA, Public Service Auditor Appointments organisation, who carried out an arbitration exercise and came up with a figure which was midway. So it was reasonable, and it was in line with what happened in the other councils. And so we agreed to pay the invoice, and then they've made several attempts to submit the invoice, but seem to have got stuck in an issue with Santander. Now, we don't bank with Santander, so I don't know quite why that happened. They also sent me an invoice for another authority rather than this one. In fact, it was an NHS organisation. It wasn't theirs, it was considerably more, so I did query that. So that hasn't gone well so far, but as yet we've not paid for 2019-20, but we have agreed the invoice, so we will. What's happening with 2021? Well, we met with the new audit manager last week, I think, a couple of weeks ago. Mark met with them, and they've agreed a process for completing, so continuing the audit they started some while ago. In July, so we're expecting them along in the next week to continue that work. Now, what they've stated is that there will just be, because the new audit manager has no experience of public sector audit in the UK, and so is expecting to have a fairly simple check-in process. But actually, how modern external audit works is that they carry out a number of set tests. They send the answers away to people in other parts of the globe who then review them and then send back a set of questions. And I don't see that process changing. So what I anticipate is that the new audit manager will come back with a set of questions which we will then attempt to answer. I don't think it's going to be quite as straightforward as but I'll keep you posted in terms of the chances of us having an audit report by September, which would have been the target of the next audit committee. 40%, perhaps. But I'll keep you posted. Have we started the 21-22 audit? No. And the 21. That was the last question I had was, have we paid anything? Actually, I've already answered. Yes, it's not the kind of arrangement we're used to. It's certainly not what we would expect. And the dialogue with the auditors hasn't been very comfortable. In fact, it's been largely non-existent for a while. But we continue to try and maintain contact with them. There is a new process starting for applications for the new, because the current set of contracts finishes this year. So we are now in the process of having new auditors appointed. And I'm sorry, I've gone a bit hazy in terms of where we are with the timetable, but certainly by April 24, we will have new auditors in. So that might put some pressure on the existing ones to get the work finished in time, but we have no control over that. It is a statutory process, there's an agreed timetable, but there are no penalties, there's no enforcement activity. So we have really no choice but to just wait and help them to get to a point where they can. Actually, this just as an aside, I remember recently in fact, I think it might have been Levelling Up, the papers we were going through, one of the things that's requested was copies of the last 2 years' audited accounts. Provide copies of the last 2 years' audited accounts. So potentially, there is a risk there that we will be debarred access to government funding because we haven't got the. We can only explain to them that it's not our fault, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I'm sorry, Jenny, I'm not making your life any happier, am I?
Does that at least answer the question for Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Barnes? Not a happy answer, but at least I think it's a full and accurate answer.
We must be looking for alternatives now.
Joe, just on that point.
Yeah, Mr. Flynn.
Clarify for members' benefit, we have entered the same process as before with the public sector audit appointments. So, because practically every council in the country will do this, and that was a report that we discussed at the committee and agreed to go for that approach. So, we will wait to be told who the auditor will be appointed.
Yes, Councillor Barnes.
I hope that the journalists who usually listen in on these meetings are taking full note and go back and see if it's a national problem, because it's a disgrace, absolute disgrace. If our funding depends on our audited accounts and we haven't got any, then they are holding us to ransom, and it's appalling. And I think that should be highlighted.
Sorry, Chair, just to say that is speculation on my part. Stress that there's nothing to say that we won't get access to funding because we don't have audited accounts. It just crossed my mind when I read it. Well, we can't provide audited accounts. Is there any significance in that?
No, thank you, but it's a risk that you quite rightly pointed out to us. Yeah. Right, members, are there further questions or comments? That was a very good debate, so thank you for that. Just before I put the recommendation to the vote, Ms Stroud just wants to make an amendment.
So just to propose that, hearing the discussion about our governance challenges for the year ahead, I propose that we do add an additional bullet point in there to reference our around responding to grant administration.
Thank you. I think that would be very helpful since we started the process last financial year on that, and it'd be very good to pick that up and carry on with it. So I move the recommendation, which is that we approve the annual governance statement 2021-22 at Appendix 1 for sign-off by the joint leader of the Council and the Managing Director for inclusion in the annual statement of accounts. Can I see those in favour, please? And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. That now brings us on to item 6, the Internal Audit Report 2021-22, including audit opinion and commentary from Mr Bromwich.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening all. Yes, so the report before you this evening is the annual report for 21-22. It is essentially a summary of what took place during last year. Now, there are 3 blank pages contained in the main body of the report. You may have seen those as you browse through it. But just to give you an assurance, there's no information missing there. I suppose we could say that they were intentional blanks, but that's not the case. We're not entirely sure why they appeared, but just to give you assurance that there's nothing actually missing from the report itself. So moving on to the summary details of the report, there are 16 areas have been reviewed by internal audit and reported on during last year. That gives more than sufficient coverage to form an overall opinion, which I am duty bound to do at year end. We will share the core financial outcomes with external audit when they are ready to receive them. Obviously, we've just had that conversation, so we're ready to offer those to them as and when they're ready to receive them. So there shouldn't be any delay in regards to that. As far as the follow-ups are concerned, we've continued the programme throughout the year, and it's shown a very positive direction of travel in regards to the findings and recommendations and the actions taken to address any potential risks that have been highlighted through the audit work. National Fraud Initiative, we as internal audit taken oversight of that, and that has also continued throughout the year. We've also discussed earlier that we've had direct input in regards to the checks and balances in regards to the grants that have been paid, and that will continue as long as is necessary. But certainly we've taken oversight of that over the last 12 months. We have also completed some external work in regards to Shropshire and Wrekin Fire and Rescue Authority, and on the back of that work that we completed last year, they have in fact invited us back to provide their internal audit provision for this year. So we're currently working with them in regards to that delivery as well. The appendices contained in the report provide some metrics for you. Obviously, several of you are new to the committee, so you probably haven't seen these before. What I will do is to put a caveat against what you're reading there is that as we move forward, we'll probably be changing those in regards to the way that we report on our performance management figures. But in regards to last year, these were being reported on a regular basis every time committee sat. Appendix 1 indicates that we delivered essentially more than we initially planned to, so that is good. Productivity figure you'll see was slightly down. It was lower than expectation, but we have a very clear understanding why that was. We are looking at reworking our performance management figures and how we present those to the committee and members. And what we are seeking to provide is a better oversight of the service and essentially corporate health as we move forwards, which should give a greater assurance for members of this committee. In Appendix 2 and 4, when I was reading the report just before I noticed a couple of typos, so my apologies for that. The figures in regards to the moderate or below assurances in Appendix 2 should read 6 rather than 3. And also on Appendix 3, the follow-ups, again, it should read 6 rather than 3. Apologies for those mistakes within the report. It makes no material difference to the report, but just for clarity, I thought I would bring those to your attention. In Appendix 4, you'll see a list of all of the areas that we worked on as internal audit last year. And within those areas, there is a limited assurance audit. That was essentially at draft report stage at the time that this report was written. And what I will notify you of is the fact that there is work continuing in regards to that particular area. It was a specific piece of work in connection with training records within the operational services. We will be obviously reporting in due course and will provide a final assurance when the work is finally assessed and completed. That report will come before you as the Audit Committee for you to consider. What I can say is that the assurance may change. It certainly won't be any lower than what has been reported as a draft at the moment, as limited assurance. But with the work that is being undertaken, then depending on the evidence that we further find, that may have an influence as we go forwards. But that will be reported in the final assessment, and the assurance will be brought before you for your consideration. Appendix 5, page 28 is really the key message in the annual report, and that's my opinion and commentary. The opinion provides an overall assurance and is summed up really on page 28, first paragraph, and the last paragraph of page 29. And really to sum those two paragraphs up, it essentially provides a reasonably clean bill of health, which, as John was reporting earlier, certainly chimes with the AGS that was reported. Also included in the papers tonight is a copy of our charter. Now, the charter is really an overview of what we do, how we do it, and how it gets delivered. And I bring that before committee on a regular annual basis as part of the annual report. Again, it will be new to a number of you, but it really sets out the store for internal audit and how we go about our business. Also included in the report as the final appendices is the improvement programme for the service, which was completed at the end of the municipal year, and all of the points that we had identified as part of a self-assessment exercise we do were actually completed as at the end of March. So again, that's really in the annual report for your information. Just so that the new members, if I may, Chair, are aware, what we usually do is to bring what we term as a progress report before committee on a regular quarterly basis, which sort of plots where we are and where we're heading in regards to the internal audit programme. That particular report does identify any potential areas of risk for keep an eye on as we move forwards. But the annual report is very much a summary of all of those progress reports that are brought together. So the likes of Councillor Amos and Councillor Barnes have seen those progress reports, and those are essentially reflected within the annual report that's before you this evening. Take any questions, Chair? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Bromwich. Another very comprehensive introduction to the report. Perhaps I could just start with just one point, which is on Appendix 5, the second substantive paragraph under internal audit. And it talks about the consequences of people either working from home or working from the office. And there's clearly issues with people working at home as opposed to being in the office from the audit perspective. So could you just update the committee on the extent to which, and I know members probably have different views on this, my own view would be that from audit purposes and other purposes, it is helpful to have as many people in the office as possible in the kind of environments in which we work, where people need to discuss things rather than just do it remotely from an email. So can you just update us on percentages, or how many people are now in the office as opposed to working at home, or how many people are hybrid or whatever?
Thank you, Chair. Certainly the corporate approach in regards to the hybrid working that we operate now as an organisation likes to see the staff in for the majority of their time, or certainly a couple of days a week. From an internal audit perspective, our work is very much driven by the conversations that we have with obviously other officers and individuals within the organisation. We did find that we had to take a different approach when COVID hit and we were all locked down. Obviously, we had to essentially re-engineer the way that we audited, and that was both from meeting people as well as getting evidence in regards to the work that we were reporting on. Obviously, we've been working with this change of approach for over 12 months now, and I suppose it has got easier with time, and we have adapted our approach from an internal audit perspective in order to make the best of the hybrid working that we find ourselves in. So we tend to run our workloads and ensure that we're in the offices. We want specific meetings or face-to-face meetings, and when certainly my team attend the office at least a couple of days a week. But obviously we are a shared service, so we operate out a number of sites, not just Worcester. So certainly from our perspective, we may not have a particular officer in the Worcester site every week for at least 2 days, but we have got someone in the various sites that we operate from over that period. From an internal audit perspective, we like to have those 5-10 minute conversations with people when we see them, and we can glean a lot of information from conversations that take place when we're making a cup of tea or a cup of coffee in the kitchen and having those conversations with people. We enjoy that, and we like to have that face-to-face contact, and we will encourage that as much as we practically can with the new way of working. So it is a new approach, it is the new norm, but overall I don't think it's had a major impact on the quality of the audits that we produce if there is any particular concern in regards to any assurances or the quality of an audit, that will be picked up through our own internal processes where we moderate the audits and ensure that quality assurance is applied. Chair.
Thank you, Mr Bromwich. That's encouraging. Right, members of the committee, questions or comments? Councillor Barnes.
First of all, on Appendix 2, service productivity seems to have slipped this year. Last year it was 62% average, this year 58%. Can you comment?
Mr Bromwich, I'm sure he can.
Through you, Chair. Yes. Again, it clearly shows that a reduction. That has, we know why that is, and the reason for that is a combination of factors. We were still, at the beginning of the financial year, dealing with some of the ongoing COVID impact. We also had some ICT downtime when we transitioned into Office 365. From a shared service perspective, it was particularly challenging for our ICT colleagues because of the multiple logons that we require. So we did have some challenges to overcome in regards to that, and as a combination of factors over the period of time, that's impacted slightly on the productivity figure. That said, we were still able to deliver in excess of the number of the audits that we originally identified. So from my perspective and drawing an opinion from the work that was done, I still had more than enough work across the organisation in order to ensure that I could draw an opinion and present that here before you tonight.
Councillor Barnes.
Follow up on that, based on Appendix 5 then. You talk about office and remote working, and the line is, this has continued to create many challenges along with the move to Office 365. So what challenges have you had with Office 365 and how has it impacted?
Mr Bromwich.
Through you, Chair. When we transitioned to it, as I say, we suffered because of the way that the shared service operates throughout the different partners. It wasn't a clean transition similar to the other staff members within Worcester City Council. We're operating across 5 partners, and as a consequence there was some conflicts in regards to logons and so on and so forth, and that impacted on the profiling of the users and the ability to log on to the different sites and deliver the audits that we needed to do. So I think I made reference to the other challenges that we've had in as much as with hybrid working and so on and so forth, and the challenges that brings, where it's with internal audit, it's very enlightening to have a 5-minute conversation with someone at their desk, and obviously if they're not there when internal audits are in, unfortunately you can't have that interaction which can obtain a lot of information in a very short time and lead to a better understanding of a particular area that we're working on at that time. So we have to rely on Teams or email, whereas before it was literally a face-to-face 5-minute conversation because they just happened to be sitting at their desk and we were walking past. So it's just understanding and adjusting to the new norm and making sure that we're working as effectively and efficiently as we can within the parameters that we've got. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Bromwich. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Mackay?
Yeah, thank you for that. Staying on that same theme, we heard about children from schools who are having to prepare themselves for using Zoom meeting for lessons and such like, and the difficulties with home Wi-Fi. And I'm wondering, you said about the quality of the audit work hasn't been too badly affected, which we understand. But what about, you sort of hinted at it just now, what about the timeliness of it all? Because if people are having difficulties with Teams meetings from home and such like, that's going to have an effect on your work, ultimately, and what you can get done in a particular sort of event. So a couple of questions, really. One, is home Wi-Fi a problem? And would you prefer people back in the offices?
Well, I'd like you to say the answer to the last question is yes. But let's see what you say, Mr Bromwich.
As far as the home Wi-Fi is concerned, we haven't noticed a particular adverse effect with the home Wi-Fis that certainly my staff use, or those staff that they are having a dialogue with, whether it's Teams or via email or whatever method they're using. As far as staff in the office is concerned, the corporate approach is essentially the majority of your time, or certainly 2 days a week, and certainly we work with that, and we're happy to do so, and we will make the best of whatever is available to us, whether it's Teams, whether it's email, whether it's 365, so we can use the chat facility, and so on and so forth. So it's certainly just ensuring that we extract the best out of everything that is available to us.
Thank you, Mr Bromwich. I think Ms Stroud would just like to add something to the answer there.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to give members a bit of reassurance about our hybrid working policy. And of course, it has been approved by our policy is explicit that workplace is the office. Majority of time to be spent in the time at home each week being productive time. And the policy is very, very clear that if you're needed in the office, then you will attend the office. And it couldn't be any more explicit on that point. So as Andy's work programme moves forward, as and when he wants people to come in and sit and look him in the eye face to face, you have my assurance, councillors, that we as a senior leadership team will make that happen. We have the policy there, which gives us the mandate to instruct people. I think one of the things that I think, just to put two of Andy's points in context, if I may, it was a really bumpy start to the outgoing year, and the audit team did particularly suffer with tech, really suffered. So that, in terms of our look back, that was definitely an impact. If the council was concerned on an ongoing basis that people's working conditions at home were suboptimal, then we would expect them to come back in. Again, that's really clear in our policy. So I wouldn't want you to think that we're sort of limping along on an ongoing basis. This is a look back at having to move quite fast and change a lot of things quite fast. And then the other point I wanted to make there was I just wanted to underscore the point that Andy's made about those chance conversations. So instead of a planned discussion face-to-face, where Andy should feel he can say to an officer, I'd like you to come in and we'll have that chat, and he would have our absolute backing in making sure that that colleague came in. It's those chance conversations that are really valuable in the office, and I've been in one of our buildings today and had half a dozen of those chance conversations, and that's one of the real reasons why we've pushed this point about coming back. And so there is a sort of certain magic to that, which I recognise we have lost a little bit of, which is why we've been really clear with our workforce that we do expect time in the office. But it's organising your working week so that you will coincide with other colleagues, and teams have gravitated to team days, certain days, so that, for those corporate support services, you can organise your team so that you coincide with another team, perhaps more of a frontline team, and say, when are you in, when are we in, and make sure that you can have that face-to-face time if you need it, either on a one-to-one or on a team. I just wanted to give you a little bit of assurance about that it's not become kind of a totally employee-led scenario in terms of when. It's not, we haven't gone to that end.
Thank you. There were nice bit of robustness there. Very happy to hear that. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say in support, my company, as we were heading into the initial lockdown, had just installed 365 and we'd had no training in it, and then our IT department was furloughed. So we know exactly what you mean. We were stumbling around in the dark.
Councillor Petrosky.
Just very briefly, I mean, personally, I don't have an issue with where people work from, as long as they're productive. I mean, that's in terms of, and also their mental health and the life-work balance is maintained. We want happy people to deliver services here. So personally, I've got no issue with that. I benefited from going into lockdown day one. All the IT was set up and productivity went up in my place of work. So I think we should be a little bit careful with sort of jumping to conclusions. What I would like to ask about is the two on page 26, health and safety and CCP, those outcomes when it comes to the assurances. Could you please provide a little bit of narrative when it comes to the limited and critical review assurances, please? So it's page 26, health and safety and CCP, and the assurance outcomes were limited and critical review.
Through you, Chair. Yes. In the progress reports, we always report what the different the assurance levels are and what the definition is in regards to that. But essentially, where we have a limited assurance, I should say that moderate and above, there's essentially a sound control environment. Where we have a limited or no assurance, that's where we have identified some potential weaknesses which could in turn identify potential risks. And as a consequence, there are anything that is limited or no assurance, those are the ones that we are particularly interested in, and I should say, as an audit committee, should be particularly interested in. Because those are where the potential risks are, and I emphasise potential in regards to the organisation as a whole, because it's throwing what amounts to a potential weakness forwards, which in turn leads to a potential risk. And so it's making sure that we're all clear as to what the finding is, what the risk associated with that finding is, what the recommendation is in order to mitigate that risk, and also, more importantly, what the management action plan is in order to address the particular issue or issues that have been identified as part of that work. The actual management action plan is very much there in order to address any potential risk. So it mitigates that risk going forwards.
Yes, please do, Councillor Petrosky.
So am I to understand that in terms of the management action planning in those two specific areas, considering that these are fairly recent audit reports completion dates, you're satisfied that the action planning is in place?
Mr. Bromwich.
Through you, Chair. In regards to this particular piece of work, this is still ongoing. This is draft. It was reported at a draft stage because it was the annual report. It is ongoing. So we've still got work to actually finalise on this and evidence to obtain. And depending on the final pieces of work that are undertaken, that could have an impact on what amounts to the assurance overall, because we define the assurance very clearly, and if when the full report is drafted and all of the evidence has been received, we will then, as part of that final reporting, allocate a specific assurance based on the evidence that we've received for all of the work that's been undertaken.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Trotsky?
Partially, I'm afraid. I'm really
do
sorry
come
to be a
back,
pain.
come back.
The CCP, so it's, this one is not in draft at all, so, and it merits critical review according to the report. So if you could please speak to this one. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, yeah, the CCP is what we term as a critical review. And again, we, as internal audit, can change the way that we review certain areas depending on what is taking place at the time. Often what we will do is to, as part of our, what we term our scoping meeting, we will identify what sort of an approach is best suited in order to add the most value when the report is delivered. Where we term it as a critical review or a critical friend, often there is a lot of change taking place, and it wouldn't be representative or indeed fair on the service to audit at that particular point in time because of the changes that are happening there. Those changes could be procedure, could be process, they could be legislative. Any number of changes could be happening and impacting that particular area. So as a consequence, we choose to audit in different ways. So we'll either just do a normal review, we'll do a compliance check, we'll do a critical friend, we'll do what amounts to a very tight scoped audit. So it's really dependent on what we're looking at the time and what other influences we have. And then usually with a critical review, we work with the service area and help them to understand where they need to be going in the future in order to address whatever changes are happening at that particular point in time. It could be contractual changes, it could be pretty much anything, but if they are sufficiently material to the area that we're looking at, then we would adopt a slightly different approach. Otherwise, what would happen, and it's a waste of everybody's time, is that we would actually be reporting what they already know. And that doesn't add any value to anybody or the organisation. So we take a step back and then we will help them through so that they can then formulate their action plan in order to deal with the change, so that in going forwards it's adding value to that service. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Petrowski. Does that answer?
Just for clarity, CCP.
Caring for communities and people, it's one of our contracted homelessness service providers.
Yes, that's a good point, Councillor Petrowski. Jargon and all the. How many times have we said that? Spell it out.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, point taken.
Right. Any other question or comments on this item? In which case, if I could put the recommendation to the committee, and I don't know how we can not do it, is asking us to note the report. I've never yet seen a vote which refuses to note a report we've just spent half an hour discussing. Anyway, formally I put it to you, do we note the report? Please show. Thank you. Unfortunately, that is unanimous. Otherwise, I would ask you why you voted against it, or how you could vote against it. That takes us on to the final item, any other business. I haven't been notified of any. Is there any? It has to be urgent business? No? In which case, I thank you very much for your attendance. I hope the new members found the meeting useful and look forward to your future involvement. Thank you very much indeed. And the meeting finishes at whatever time it is, because the clock doesn't work and I can't see it.
Still 10 to 8. 8:30.